It's funny that Epiphanius critiques December 25th for being pagan, but then he goes on to explain all these pagan celebrations happening on his preferred date. If you go back to the 3rd century, it definitely looks like there are Christians dating the birth of Jesus based on these various calculation methods. This has to do with biblical chronology. It has to do with assumptions about how God created the earth. And, Genesis says that God creates the sun and the moon as signs. Now, most people read that as referring to just the seasons. They're marking this flowing of the seasons, but they viewed it as birth of Jesus, the death of Jesus, the conception of Jesus. All of this is going to be marked by the sun and the moon. He did his Passover calculations and came to that date, even though his Passover calculations are wrong.
Same time, you see the same kind of growth in paganism with Macrobius' Saturnalia, where he says that Dionysus is depicted as a newborn child at the winter solstice. Mm-hmm. And then he's depicted as an old man at the fall equinox, depicting that his whole life cycle is the year, starting at the winter solstice.
Macrobius also says, when he talks about the sun god, practically all the gods are the sun god.
Yes, that's the point. They're all this world soul in Platonism.
It's the all god. Yeah. I know.
That's Platonism, though. It's almost monotheistic, where the gods are all faces of the one. Plato's the one. And this god is born at the winter solstice, just like the one God of Christianity. Today, at this hour, Cori, that is virgin, gave birth to Ion. Neoplatonist writers equate Ion with Dionysus and Osiris. Kamu, that is Cori or virgin. And the child who was born of her, they call Dusaris. And I don't know if you know about Dusaris. He's another god, kind of a Dionysian figure in Arabia. That is the Lord's begotten. So that water flowing from a spring in the temple of Father Liber on the island of Andros always has the flavor of water on January 5th.
Of wine.
And the day is called Theodosia, God's gift day.
And Liber is Dionysus.
Yes. Same day of the year. Same water turning into wine miracle. Epiphany. It is that time of the year. Christmas time, the holidays. December 17th, the traditional date where Saturnalia would start in ancient Rome. Today's topic has to do with the dating of Christmas, December 25th. Where does this date come from? Is it possible that it has some pre-Christian pagan influence? Or was there just a completely separate calculation being done by Christian church fathers in the early 3rd century? Christian scholar T.C. Schmidt received his Ph.D. from Yale University and is an associate professor at Fairfield University. His publications concern topics such as the historical Jesus, the formation of the New Testament, the history of Christianity in Eastern context, and the origin of Christmas. Professor Schmidt has produced peer-reviewed translations from Latin, Greek, Syriac, and Arabic texts. His books have been published with Oxford University Press, Cambridge University Press, and others. He has written books on Josephus, and the topic today, he has written peer-reviewed articles on the calculation of December 25th. Links are in the description. Please check those out. But today, we are having a fiery discussion on the origins of December 25th and also January 6th, the Epiphany. Was this borrowed or stolen from the pagans, or was this all purely Christian and has nothing to do with any outside influence? We're going to get into that and more. You are about to attain true gnosis. Welcome back to the Gnostic Informant, and you are about to attain true gnosis. And joining me today for the second time, actually, is Dr. Thomas Schmidt, Ph.D. from Yale University. As you just saw in the intro there, all his credentials, the paper that we're going to discuss. And it is the Christmas season, so I wanted to get you on. I actually reached out to you months ago about this, and when we talked about your new book, the Josephus book, which is links in the description for that, by the way. Great book. It's I heard some good things at the SBL conference. People are
It's changing some minds. So that link's in the description. But when we talked about that book, I said, hey, I'm a fan of your article about the calculation theory that you wrote, and there's a link for this in the description as well if you guys want to read this. Calculating December 25th as the birth of Jesus in Hippolytus's canon and Chronicon. Thomas Schmidt, who's here today, there's the abstract here, but I'll let you discuss basically what you bring to the table, because there's 3 big articles when it comes to this discussion. The first one is from Dr. Hymans, who was kind of the first to shake up the idea of the history religions theory that December 25th has this pagan origins going on. And, Sol Invictus was I think it was a 19th century scholar who came along and said, it's not just Saturnalia, it's Sol Invictus, December 25th, Aurelian. And this became the consensus for like 200 years. Hymans comes along and says, whoa, hey, hold on a second. The evidence might not be that great. So then he kind of shakes things up. And then you come along, I want to say like 10 years later after that, something like that, maybe 5-10 years later, and you put out this article and saying, actually, there might be some calculations happening early on before Aurelian in 274. And Hippolytus of Rome, actually, we have some good evidence to suggest that he thought that the birth of Christ was on December 25th, and that the word genesis in Greek doesn't mean birth, but means conception. And you go through it in the article, and actually it's very convincing, by the way, how you show how Matthew uses the same word in Matthew for genesis, for conception, not birth. And if you're a Christian, you're probably going to follow suit, most likely. Who knows? It doesn't have to be. But I liked your arguments, and I just want to give you a chance to explain exactly what we're talking about here.
Thanks, Neil. Yep, the big question is always, why do we celebrate the birth of Jesus on December 25th? Why do Christians do that? Almost all Christians everywhere have done that for hundreds and hundreds of years. How did that come about? And there are a couple different theories. The one theory you mentioned, the history of religions theory, is that, well, there was a Roman pagan festival that occurred on December 25th. Some people say Saturnalia. Some people will say like Brumalia or Sigillaria or Sol Invictus, the feast to the sun god. And that once Christianity was taking hold in Rome, this date, December 25th, was selected in order to like please pagan sentiments or as a response to paganism or syncretism or something like that was happening. That's one theory. The other theory is that, well, if you look at early Christian writings, you can see that these early Christians are very interested in biblical chronology. They're interested in when dates happen in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. They're very interested in the crucifixion of Jesus. When did that happen? And of course, they're interested in when Jesus was born. And so they're putting out different dates, and they're using various assumptions, many of which some people might find a little strange today, but some assumptions about how and when Jesus was born. And the calculation theory goes that actually some early Christians selected the date of December 25th before these pagan celebrations on December 25th emerged. And they selected it not because of pagan ideas, but because they thought Jesus was born on that day due to various biblical chronological calculations and all these other assumptions that they had about how God created the world. I thought growing up, I just assumed the Roman hypothesis was the correct one. I just thought, this is probably Saturnalia or something like that. And then I was translating this commentary on the book of Daniel, written by an ancient Christian named Hippolytus of Rome. And in it, he says Jesus was born on December 25th. And I was shocked by this because he's writing around the year 200, 220, maybe 230. It seems so early to me. And then I found out that the Feast of the Sun God wasn't developed or didn't develop until the 270s. Very interesting stuff. However, as you and I think some of your listeners will know, that passage in the commentary is highly debated because it turns out not all the manuscripts say December 25th. One doesn't give any date. And then another one, the earliest one, gives this bizarre contradictory double date.
Yeah, April and December, yeah.
Yes. And so, it looks like clearly someone has monkeyed about with the manuscripts. And and
there's also the idea that later Christians once they have a liturgical date for December 25th, there's a tendency to kind of go back and sort of fix other, which is understandable. You want everything to be uniform. You don't want to pass down, to the students of the future, confuse them all with all these dates. Let's just fix them all, and so we're all on the same page. I get it.
Exactly. And we know that something like that was happening. I mean, it's unlikely that Hippolytus wrote 3 different things, and so we've got 3 different manuscript traditions. It seems like something is happening. It is possible he wrote 2 different things. There is some evidence that he changed his mind, but so that's where things stood. And I just kind of let that be for a little bit. And then I was translating a different work of Hippolytus, probably by the same author, written in Rome in 235 or 222. And I noticed something really interesting. This work seems to say that Jesus was born 9 months after the anniversary of the creation of the world. And if you look at it's a chronological work. It's called the Chronicon. And if you look at when Hippolytus thought the world was created, he was, we would call him today, if he was around today, he would be called a 6-day creationist. So he read the opening chapters of Genesis very literally. Not all early Christians did that, but he did do that. And he thought that the world was created about 5,000 years ago. And he thought, if you're a 6-day creationist, there has to be a day. You have to select a calendar day in which God, on day 1 and then day 2 and day 3 and day 4. And so he's trying to figure this out. And it looks like he places the first day of creation on March 25th. And if he thought Jesus was born 9 months after that, if that's the anniversary of the creation of the world, March 25th, which was the vernal equinox in the Roman calendar, then that's December 25th.
9 months exactly. Yeah.
So I wrote an article on that, and there is some other very interesting corroborating evidence. And one comes from this statue, which I actually have a picture of.
Yeah. Where did they find this? They dug this up.
They dug it up. Yeah. It was found in the 1500s in Rome, and it was heavily damaged. The figure you see there is almost completely restored.
Isn't it modeled off of another Herodotean or one or something like that? Or I think maybe.
Yeah, that rings a bell.
Yeah.
I think
it looks very familiar,
so.
But yeah, okay.
Yeah,
I could be wrong. Yeah.
You can tell that the throne or the chair is actually a lot older than the seated figure, because when it was found, the figure was totally broken off. So they had to completely restore it. And there are several scholars, even a majority of scholars, believe that the statue was originally of a woman, not a man.
Yes. I remember that. Yeah.
So that's a whole other.
If you take the head off and just pretend the head's not there, you can almost see why they would think that.
Yeah. There's only 1 or 2 drawings of the statue before it was redone. And in one of them, it looks like a woman. It definitely looks female. Yeah. So, well, what we're interested in is what's on the inscribed on the side of the chair. I've got another picture I can try and share too. Let me see if I can.
Oh yeah, that's a nice picture. Okay. Because I've been looking for good pictures of this, and I'm glad you found one of these, because these are pretty hard to find.
They are, because this is at the Vatican Library, and the Vatican is very particular about who they let take pictures.
Yeah.
I have seen this statue myself.
Wow.
And it's very striking. And I actually do have much better pictures, but I'm not allowed to share them, unfortunately. It's really sad.
Secret.
I know. Let me give another.
So that's dates, though, right?
Yes. This is a calendar. We're looking at a calendar to track the date of Easter. And Easter is when Christians celebrate the resurrection of Jesus. And Easter is correlated to Passover, because Jesus died 3 days after Passover. So in order to calculate Easter, you have to calculate Passover. Mm-hmm. And that is what this the other side of the statue does. The other side of the statue, this calculates the date of Passover. Mm-hmm. And there's 2 sets of inscriptions. The bigger one on the right is the Passover calendar. The one on the left, which is on sort of the rounded corner of the statue, that is a list of titles of Christian compositions. So the reason why I'm showing this statue is that this Passover calendar from these inscriptions, we know that the throne of the statue was inscribed in 222 AD. And that makes it arguably the earliest precisely datable Christian artifact in the world. There are Christian artifacts that are earlier, but we have to just give a rough estimate of when and where they came from, or at least when they were created. With this, though, we know that this was inscribed in 222 AD, and we know this for two reasons. One is the heading of the inscription says that it dates to year 1 of Emperor Alexander Severus, which is 222. The second reason is that the calendar begins in 222 AD, and then the third reason is that when you look at the calendar and you examine its accuracy, the calendar is trying to predict when the Passover moon. The Passover is a lunar holiday. So the Passover moon is the first full moon after the vernal equinox. And of course, the phases of the moon move around the calendar. So the date of Passover moves. Yeah, the Paschal moon. The date of Passover moves by 3 or 4 weeks potentially, year to year.
Right.
And
it can go up until April 25th, between March 25th and April 25th, or March 15th and April 25th. Isn't that what it is?
It all depends on when you think the vernal equinox is.
Right. But I'm saying those are like the maximum dates on each side.
Yes. But basically late April to late March to late April.
That's why sometimes we have 420 Easter, sometimes Easter's.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. And the fascinating thing about this is that the calendar, it actually turns out it's very hard to predict the phases of the moon. You need to have extremely good astronomical knowledge. And this calendar, from an astronomical perspective, is deeply flawed. And so it only correctly predicts the Passover moon 2 or 3 years before 222 and 2 or 3 years afterwards. And then it becomes completely off. So the reasoning goes, obviously the person who made this was probably doing their astronomical observations a couple years before 222 AD. They came up with their method. They inscribed it on the stone. It was accurate for a few years, and then it quickly became inaccurate, and it was very embarrassing.
And they're trying to get to what, 30 CE AD? Was that what they're trying to do? 33? Like, how do they know when to find the moon in what year?
So that is a great question. Yes. So if it turns out, if you come up with the correct mathematical astronomical method to predict the Passover moon, you can also retrograde the Passover cycles. So you could then, in theory, figure out not just when the Passover will occur in the future, but figure out when specific Passovers occurred in the past. And if you know the exact date that Jesus had the Last Supper, his Passover meal before he was crucified, you can figure out the exact day of the week and the exact month of the day of the month that Jesus had that Last Supper.
Yeah.
And that's what Hippolytus tries to do in this calendar. He tries to go backwards in time.
And it's my understanding that if we actually go with what we know now, I'm not talking about what Hippolytus knew or what he guessed, but for what we know now, from the 30s, 28 to 33 or 28 to 36 CE, I don't think there is a single year in that time period when the Passover actually does fall on March 25th. Is there?
You're correct. Well, remember, it has to not just be March 25th. It also has to, March 25th also would have to be a Thursday or a Friday.
Right. And if I'm not mistaken, we don't have,
correct.
It just doesn't line up.
Yes, I believe you're right, that it just doesn't work. In fact, now with all we know of astronomy, there's only really 2 possible dates. One is 30 AD, April 7th, and the other is 33 AD, April 3rd.
So that's funny because it's funny because I'm not to pick on the calculation theory people, because they're just, all they're doing is, what do the Christians think? They don't care if he's correct or not. They want to know, did Christians really believe this? And they think, and the answer is yes. But the funny part is, the calculation's wrong. December 25th wouldn't be the day he's born on.
Exactly. The funny thing is that even if the calculation theory is correct, that this is how Christians determined when Jesus was born, then it's still wrong because the Passover couldn't have happened on March 25th at any point in the late 20s and early 30s when Jesus was crucified.
But back to what we were saying, that's not what we're really getting at. We're getting at, what did they think? Did they have this belief of this sort of cosmic cycle of birth and death, the death happening at the spring equinox, the birth happening, and that's what you're trying to figure out in this article. Yes.
And so I wish I could show a better picture here. You know what I can do is I have another image that I can share. All right. So this is a pretty accurate transcription of what is inscribed on that
stone. Okay.
Yes, on that stone.
Now people can really see it.
And up here is the heading. You can see my mouse. This is the heading that talks about the first year of Emperor Alexander Severus. And then if we zoom out, you'll see these columns. And these columns have Greek letters, but it's important to remember that these Greek letters are actually Greek numerals. They're Greek numbers. And on the far left column, there's dating information, but you'll see that there are these notes scattered around, like this one right here, and this refers to a biblical Passover. This one is actually the Passover of Ezra.
I see Ezra.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's over here is the interesting one. This one right here.
Gene.
Yes, Genesis. It wraps around to the other line.
So that's
Genesis.
It could either be birth or conception.
Exactly.
It's used for both.
Exactly. And then you have an abbreviation for
Christos.
Christ.
Yeah.
And it's in the genitive.
Christou.
Yes, Christou. And then the line above tells you it's an abbreviation.
So Genesis of Christ.
Genesis of Christ. So on the statue, he thinks that Christ, the Genesis of Christ, whatever that means, happened on the Passover of April 2nd, a Wednesday of is it 1 or 2 BC, of 2 BC. And he also, if you go down, he has the suffering.
Isn't that funny that Christ was born before Christ?
Yeah, I know our calendar. If it's true that he was born in 2 BC, and most scholars think it was probably 4 BC.
Yeah. Then, just to clarify, Hippolytus isn't writing that because that BC AD system isn't for centuries later.
Exactly.
But we're just laughing at it now because we have the foresight now.
And down here he does the same thing, but for the crucifixion, the pathos. The suffering of Christ. And so what's interesting is that most scholars had thought that when Hippolytus says the Genesis of Christ, what he meant was the birth of Christ. And that means that this statue shows that in 222 AD in Rome, Hippolytus thought that Jesus was born on the Passover on April 2nd in 2 BC. Which means that he couldn't have believed Jesus was born on December 25th, obviously, if he was born on April 2nd. What I do in my article is I look at that word Genesis and I ask, what does this word really mean? I mean, we do have a word for birth, and that's specific to birth, and that's not the word that Hippolytus uses. We also have a word specific to conception, which is also not the word that he uses. So it's very frustrating. He uses this ambiguous term. And I show that actually the word Genesis can clearly refer to either conception or birth. There's examples of it referring to either one of those things.
And I thought, like I pointed out earlier, isn't it true that Matthew uses the word the Genesis of Christ right before he talks about the Annunciation?
Yes,
that's a big deal.
Yes, he does.
For what you're laying out here
in the Gospel of Matthew.
If we're talking Christian language, it's more likely they're gonna stick together and try to use the biblical language.
Yes, yeah. He says that the Genesis of Jesus came about this way, and he talks about the conception right after that. You could, it's not.
You could push back on that, yeah.
Yeah, you can by say, well, he goes on to talk about the birth, and maybe he's just painting the whole birth story kind of thing. But anyway, in my article, I show that I show where there's another work attributed to Hippolytus where he seems to prefer Genesis as meaning conception.
Really?
And then I also show that there's medical literature from around the time of Hippolytus that refers to the genesis
That's right. I remember seeing that
of
part, yeah.
infant in the womb.
That's a really that's the one that I think kind of made your article really strong. Because if they're using that word in particular for just before a birth, like as a conception, then it's just likely that that's going to be the word they're going to use here.
Yeah.
So it's a good argument.
I think so too.
I totally think the calculation theory, and my fans all know this, I think the calculation theory is pretty sound. I also have a more nuanced perspective on it, which we'll get to, but I still want to let you kind of hash this out.
If I could shore up even more of the calculation theory, what I will say is that we do have plenty of evidence that Christians thought that Jesus was conceived on the Passover apart from Hippolytus. So that all lines up with Hippolytus.
And not only that, we have early evidence of the Epiphany being connected to the January 6th stuff. So we're already, the reason why this is important is because it's already in the wintertime. It's already been 12 days of the winter solstice. And it makes sense that we're already in the ballpark at that point. I agree. Yeah. That's why I just think we got to start. That's where we got to start. And Epiphany, January 6th, was probably chosen for the same reasons. It was probably chosen because they thought Jesus was conceived on the Passover, but they happened to date the Passover to April 6th. And 9 months later was January 6th. Now, here's the thing about this. Just want to touch on this right now while we're talking about it. I hear a lot of people bring up this tradition in Judaism of people being born at the time of their death. And I don't think it's a strong argument. I don't see a lot of evidence for it. I know that Moses is in the Talmud, which is written way later. And, but like, I think that's it. I think there's like one other patriarch who they kind of attribute to being born on the date, but it's not this. I keep hearing people, even scholars I'll hear say,
by the end of the 2nd century CE, Christians had identified March 25th as the date of Jesus' crucifixion and had also determined that that was the date of his conception. And so in many places the Annunciation is celebrated on March 25th. And this most likely has to do with a convention that was in circulation around that time among historians who usually identified the dates of important historical figures' deaths with the dates of their births. But for Jesus, it was identified with the date of his conception.
There's a strong tradition in Judaism that when a patriarch dies, it's the same day they're born. And then people will go, and then they're applying this to Jesus. But this is not what they're doing here. This is the conception. It's different. And I don't think we don't even have to go there. We can just talk about the conception, and then that's it. It's a whole different thing going on here to me.
I think you're right. I've tried to find more references to that in Judaism. And I think even the references that are found are even a little squishy. I mean,
they are.
I don't think that's
none,
a good
really.
one. I know.
Yeah.
What I think is a better argument is that there is a strong tradition in Judaism of believing that God created the world on the vernal equinox.
Yeah.
So Christians are clearly getting that from the Jewish roots that they are emerging from.
And it makes sense from not just even Jewish perspective, just like any cosmological perspective, that the day when sunlight starts to take over is a day of rebirth, a day of resurrection, obviously, all types of cosmic alignments happening on this special day. And also the winter solstice also has a very similar theme going on where daylight starts to take over darkness.
Yeah. Here's another reason as well. This is sort of like it's a different kind of calculation theory. Right now, the main calculation theory was that, Jesus was conceived on the Passover, and of course he would have had a perfect 9-month gestational period. So if he was conceived on March 25th, he was born December 25th. If he was conceived on April 6th, he was born January 6th. That's the standard calculation theory. But there is an alternative calculation theory, and that is that In the Gospel of Luke, it says that Jesus was about to be 30 years old when he was baptized. And there's some evidence that some Christians took that extremely literally. And so that they believed that...
That's in Luke, you said?
In Luke, yeah. Yes.
Would you remember what... I would love to look at that.
I believe it's chapter 3. I want to say 3:23, but I think it's chapter 3. Yeah, Luke 3:23. Yeah.
Okay. I'll just got to keep going. That's all I was doing. All right. I'll start from here. All right.
Here it is.
So the genealogy of Jesus, it says, and himself was Jesus in the beginning, about 30 years old. Yeah, there it is right there, about 30 years old.
So, and it has that beginning, archamenos, beginning, and then ose is about or approximately 30 years old. Now, I read this, and as far as I know, all scholars read it as Luke just giving a general age for Jesus. He was around 30, give or take a year or two. But there is some evidence that earlier Christians thought that Jesus was exactly 30 and that he preached for exactly 1 year, because there's a Bible prophecy that says that Jesus will preach the acceptable year of the Lord. They also read that very literally, so precisely 1 year to the day.
I mean, look at this word Jose. It's like or
exactly
like about so much like. You can see it being used. I can see why they might go with that.
Yeah,
because they're not using the word pere. Pere would be like about this time.
Around. This
word is a little bit more like, pretty much 30.
Yeah.
I guess you could say.
I mean, I think it's pretty general, but let's go with it for a moment. If you think this is specific and you think Jesus was precisely exactly 30, like this is his birthday, Luke is talking about here, where he's turning 30, and then you think that he preached for exactly 1 year, that means that his birthday was the Passover, because he died on the Passover. So he preaches for 1 year until the next Passover, dies on the Passover. So you can use this argument to say that Luke is suggesting that Jesus died on the Passover and began his life on the Passover. And then it depends, of course, most people count their age from birth, not conception. But you can do another little hurdle to claim that, well, he was conceived on the Passover, not born on the Passover. So that's an alternative calculation method. There's a third one too. The third one is,
I want to hear them all.
The third one is that Luke gives a chronology of Zechariah and John the Baptist, where you have the angel appearing to Zechariah saying, "You and your wife will conceive a son." They conceive a son, John, and then 6 months later, Mary gets a similar message. She will conceive a son, which means that Jesus must be 6 months younger than John, which means that if we can figure out when John was conceived, we can figure out when Jesus was conceived. And what the ancient Christians did, you see this in John Chrysostom, for example.
They went with the Levite calendar stuff?
Is that the
one? I heard this before.
So they thought that John's father, Zechariah, was not just a priest, but was the priest. Yeah. And that when he was in the temple, when the angel appeared to him, it was on the Day of Atonement, on the vernal equinox.
Wow.
And
that's a very interesting way to do it.
Yes. Yes.
Again, it's not foolproof. It's not
right
slam dunk, but it's a 0 point. There's a non-zero chance that could be correct. Yeah.
There's a 1 in 365 and a quarter chance they got it right there.
That's also another case.
But anyway, so there's 3 different calculation methods that the early church would sometimes use, and baked into these are a lot of assumptions about, like in the one I just expressed, Luke doesn't say, "Oh, and then John was conceived right away." Luke just says, the angel says, "You're going to conceive." Well, that could have been months later. And when he says that Elizabeth, who conceives John, is in her 6th month when Mary conceives, well, that doesn't mean exactly 6 months. It could be 6.5, could be 5.5. So the problems just compound.
And I've always brought this up: the whole 9 month. Do we really think that all births are exactly 9 months? He could have been born on December 23rd or January
Exactly.
2nd. But we're talking about a higher power stuff here. So I guess I don't really get too picky about it. It's okay, fine, 9-month gestation period, fair enough. We're there.
Right.
I agree. I think the calculation theory holds a lot of water.
So to sum up, what we're saying is that if you go back to the 3rd century, the early 3rd century of the Christian era, it definitely looks like there are Christians dating the birth of Jesus, and they're dating his birth based on these various calculation methods. Yeah. And that this has to do with biblical chronology. It has to do with assumptions about how God created the earth. And, Genesis says that God creates the sun and the moon as signs. Now, most people read that as referring to just the seasons. They're marking this flowing of the seasons, but they viewed it as these are going to be signs that are not only marking the seasons, but marking important, spiritual moments in human history. So the birth of Jesus, the death of Jesus, the conception of Jesus, all of this is going to be marked by the sun and the moon. And I argue that I think Hippolytus selected December 25th because he thought Jesus was conceived on March 25th. And he thought Jesus was conceived on March 25th because he did his Passover calculations and came to that date. Even though his Passover calculations are wrong, he thought they were correct. And that's where he came up with the date.
Okay. I've always said that I don't have any problem with the calculation theory. I think it's very strong. I think they're probably, it's based on a little bit of speculation. Because once again, you have to assume that what you're saying, Genesis is conception. You have to also kind of assume that they're doing this thing, that he dies on the day he's born thing, whatever. And that's all fine, especially when you have the image of the inscription. It makes it a lot more stronger. You can see with your own eyes that they're doing these calculations. There's something going on. However, I do think there's something that gets lost here, and it's a lot of people take this and run with it and go, okay, Christmas is before 274 when Aurelian sets down this temple to Sol Invictus. Yay, Christmas is ours. It's pure. It's fully Christian. There's no paganism, and it's okay, I get it. But we're only talking about private calculations between 1 or 2, maybe 3 Christians kind of by themselves. This doesn't become a liturgical, established Christmas feast until what looks like maybe when we get to the calendar of Philocus in the 4th century, which also at that time, at the same exact time, mentions the birth of the Invincible One. Doesn't say Sol, but some other god called the Invincible One. And I guess there's a chance that could be Christ too. Most people don't think that. I don't think that either. Because I think the Aurelian establishing a temple on this date gives us precedent for why they're mentioning the Invincible One. Anyways, the thing I'm bringing up here is are we comparing apples to apples here? Because people will say, wait a minute, there is no feast for Aurelian or feast for Sol Invictus yet until after Aurelian. But then when we talk about the dating of Christmas, we don't do the same thing. We're looking for any calculation and going, we got it, game over, done. And it's wait a minute. We also let's remember there are dozens of other calculations by other Christians, May, October, September, June, all over the place, and no one brings those ones up. Well, what about those ones? Why did those get rejected? Or why did people even throw those around to begin with? We also have January 6th, which is interesting. I think that there's a strong case to be made that there was a tendency to get it somewhere close to the solstice. Fine with that too. So I think what we have to do is we got to compare apples to apples, which is when does it become a liturgical date? And I think me and Nothaf talked about this last year. We both kind of decided that it's a tie because the only really strong, he even said, well, he actually was a little more harsh than I was actually. I was surprised about this. I thought he was going to be towards your end. And he said, actually, the strongest Christmas dating we have is in 363.
So I always say the earliest really secure reference that we have are these sermons by presumably Optatus of Miletus, who was a North African bishop. So
when that bishop writes down the exact date on its liturgical, he said, the reason why I'm a little bit iffy on the Philakis calendar is because of the Christians' tendency to go back, and he had this like, he was like, I was like, really? I'll even give them, I think the calendar is, that you guys have that one. But he was like basically saying 363 is the most secure date for Christmas in the liturgical calendar. That's late. That's in the that's towards the end of we're almost towards the end of the 4th century. And I guess the point I'm trying to make is I'm trying to remind people that the nuances here. And the question is, why did 4th century Christians go with Hippolytus's proposal and not all these other ones? And then one more thing I also wanted to bring up. Not only is there, and I don't want to make it sound like an argument from silence, because it's not just that, but what I'm getting at is let's just for the sake of argument say Hippolytus calculated December 25th in 222 235, and Julius Africanus also calculated in 222. We have two of them. Let's just go with it. All right, we're going to use that as our axiom. That happened. But where is anyone citing this yet in the third century? Are other Christians kind of following suit? Was there an email sent out to all the churches that they all got this memo right away? I don't think so. In fact, there's no one really talking about it. And not only is no one talking about it, we have the opposite. I'm just going to pull up Tertullian. When he talks about birthdays and feasting, he rips it apart. He says, the interpreters of the stars were to announce Christ's birth. The first present him gifts by this bond. I imagine they put Christ under obligation themselves. What then? Shall therefore the religion of those magi act as patron now as those astrologers? Astrology nowadays, forsooth, treats of Christ is a science of the stars of Christ, not of Saturn or Mars or whomever else out of some class of the dead. It pays observance to and preaches. But however, that science has been allowed until the gospel, in order that after Christ's birth, no one should forward interpret anyone's nativity by the heaven. Okay, that's interesting. But if you keep going down to chapter 14, it gets even worse. He is like totally against this whole celebration thing. He says, to live with heathens is lawful, to die with them is not. Let us live with all. Let us be glad with them, out of community of nature, not of superstition. We are peers in soul, not in discipline, fellow possessors of the world, not of error. But if we have no right of communion in matters of this kind with strangers, how far more wicked to celebrate them among brethren? Who can maintain or defend this? The Holy Spirit upbraids the Jews with their holy days, your Sabbaths, your new moons, and ceremonies, my soul hates. Yeah. By us, to whom Sabbaths are strange, the new moons, the festivals, formerly beloved by God, the Saturnalia, the New Year's, he uses the word Brumalia, midwinter. The word is actually Brumalia, but it's translated midwinter's festivals. Matronalia are frequented. Presents come and go. He's talking about gift giving, New Year's gifts, games join their noise, banquets join their din. Oh, better fidelity of their nations to their own sect, which claims no solemnity of the Christians for itself, not the Lord's Day, not Pentecost, even they had not known them. It's so hard to read this translation. Would they have been shared with us? For they would fear lest they should be seen Christians. So he's basically kind of going off on this whole like celebration of festivals and dates. The last one I wanted to bring up real quick is Origen in the same time period. He sort of says something similar.
Yeah, he does.
And this one's a little more clear than Tertullian's translation, but this one, he says, and on birthdays, when the lawless word reigns over them, they dance so that their movements please please that word, some of those before us have observed what is written in Genesis about the birthday of Pharaoh, and has told that the worthless man who loves things connected with birth keeps birthday festivals. And we, taking this suggestion from him, find in no scripture that a birthday was kept by a righteous man. Now that's in 245.
Yeah.
So this tells me that this celebration of birthdays isn't popular. Maybe not. Maybe there are Christians doing it, but it's not a church thing yet. It's not liturgical. It's not official. Which brings me to my last point that I want to throw at you and get your thoughts on. Is it possible that once you have all these proposals for the birth date of Christ, you have the September one, you have the June one, you have the April one, you have December 25th, you have January 6th. Is it possible that they go with Tertullian, or they go with Hippolytus's calculation because of the significance of the solstice? Like, well, it makes sense to me. Not even because of pagans, just because it sounds pretty cool. Christ is born on the winter solstice. Like, you know what I mean?
You are right to make a distinction between when someone happened to calculate the birthday of Jesus on December 25th and when the church started celebrating this as a holiday or holy day or feast day. Those are two very different things and very different maneuvers.
Yeah.
And you're also right that Tertullian and Origen in the 3rd century, who are illustrious Christian writers, they're very influential. They clearly don't like celebrating birthdays. And it seems like the church was not really celebrating the birth of Jesus on December 25th, even if they had marked it as a day.
Let alone gift giving and festivities. Yeah. That's a whole nother thing. But yeah,
I know the early Christians, they faced this dual burden because they didn't want to do anything that the pagans were doing, but then they also didn't want to do anything the Jews were doing. And so they had like this like terrible thing where like, how can we celebrate, mark the resurrection of Jesus when it's on the Passover? We don't want to look. So they have these problems they have to do. Well, your question about is an alternative one. So we've talked about the calculation theory and its various iterations, and clearly there were some Christians doing these kinds of calculations for the birth of Jesus in the 3rd century, in the early 3rd century. Then there's the idea of a pagan festival that's adopted by later Christians, which we'll talk about in a moment. But you have a second possibility of what if it's just the natural symbolism of a dark day? The winter solstice is the darkest day of the year in the Northern Hemisphere. And it's kind of makes sense, just like how Christians marked the vernal equinox as the creation of the world. They did that based on Jewish tradition. Maybe they mark the dawning of the light of the world, Jesus, on the darkest day of the year, the winter solstice. And I think we can actually say with definitively that some of them certainly did do that. We have a set of Christmas homilies, early Christmas sermons, where Christians are doing precisely that, where we have these very famous preachers that are talking about how the darkness is about to start being extinguished by the sun, and this is a fitting day for Jesus, the light of the world, to enter in. And there's a Christian in the 3rd century which says the same thing. He says it's we don't know the name of the author. We do know when he wrote. He wrote in 243 AD, and he's revising Hippolytus's Passover calendar because it's wrong, and he knows it's wrong, and he's trying to figure it out. And he says that Jesus was born on March 28th, and that's the Passover. And so again, we have this Passover as the beginning of Jesus's life, whether it's conception or birth, there's differences. But what he says, because March 28th is not the equinox, but he says, if you read the book of Genesis, over the 6 days of creation, God doesn't create the sun on day 1. He creates the sun on day 4. So you have March 25th. 4 days after the... Yes. Yeah. So the 25th, 26th, 27th, 28th is the 4th day. And he then says, Jesus, the Son of Righteousness, has arisen with healing in his wings, was born on March 28th. So he's using this solar imagery of light, and he thinks that, so anyway, he's doing the same thing. So
Yeah.
definitely, that is a factor, maybe even the factor. The remaining question, though, is, so we've got the calculation stuff, we've got the solar symbolism stuff, but the other question is, were pagan holidays a factor
Yes.
in
That's
selecting?
the question. I'm saying yes as a question. I'm not saying we
Yeah.
can definitively say yes. I'm saying that's
Exactly.
that's the tiebreaker, I guess. If we're gonna have a tiebreaker, is it do they look at the pagans at the same time, going, Aurelian set up the temple of Sol Invictus. You also have the festival seasons, not just of Saturnalia, but of Calends. And the Calends, we know, goes all the way past Theodosius's decree. Theodosius' decree ends Saturnalia, but they continue the Calends. It's become secular.
It's a civic holiday, yeah.
So the gift giving and all the festivities are still going, just during the New Year's feast. That's one of the options. And there are other sources in pagan literature, like Plutarch. I actually have one of them pulled up, where he says right here from Moralia. He said, and this is in like 110 AD, I think, where he says, Isis, when she perceived that she was pregnant, put herself an amulet on the 6th day of the month of Phaeophi. About the time of the winter solstice, she gave birth to Harpocrates, which means Horus the child in Greek. Imperfect and premature and amid early flowers. But this is interesting, and this is what I found really interesting about this. For this reason, they bring him as an offering of fir fruits and growing lentils, and the days of this birth they celebrate after the spring equinox, which I think is weird, because once again we have this connection between the spring equinox and the winter solstice.
Yeah.
And this does not mean they copied this, but it gives us something to look at and go, is this where are they all doing this sort of cosmological dating based on the stars and the moon and the sun?
Yep.
Are they coming to the conclusion? It's when we go to the Native Americans and we find that they also have a moon god and a sun father or whatever, and like an earth mother, and we're like, how the hell do they have the same one? And it's really not that. It's really not that crazy if you think about it. There's only a few options here. They're seeing the same things happening in the sky. I mean, it's like two different beavers across the planet building the same dam. Doesn't mean one copied the other. But I think we can have a hybrid theory about December 25th makes a lot of sense here. That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, you're right to point that out. I think that one of the issues, so there's a couple of issues. One is that as we know, like, just noticing that it's getting darker out in the northern hemisphere is a common human phenomenon.
Yeah.
I mean, even now when we're assaulted, we have natural light, human created electricity, and then we have Twitter and computers to keep us busy. We still notice that it's getting darker. I mean, imagine if you had no electricity, it would be a really, really big deal. You would know exactly when the days are getting shorter, when they're getting longer. That would be extremely important to you. And we see that throughout human civilization, throughout all cultures. They all know these things. They might have a different day they select to be the winter solstice or the vernal equinox, but they all know this is occurring. Another factor here is that, if you look at Roman religious calendars in the city of Rome, so this is not the Roman Empire, it's just the city of Rome, they have feast days to gods and games to gods like all over the place. It's like 30% of their days have some kind of deity associated with them. And if you go to the major cities in the Roman Empire, it's going to be every day of the week, every day of the year is going to be that way. So we want to be careful to distinguish between, is this just coincidental? Is it like, what's going on here? And the question is then, did the Romans have a pagan celebration on December 25th to the sun god? And was this before the festival of Christmas was developed? And another question,
more importantly, before the festival, not before the calculation.
Yes.
Be very clear on that.
Exactly. Before the festival, yeah. And then another question, though, is, did this influence? I mean, it's possible that there was a pagan celebration that had no influence on it. It's also possible there was one that did influence it. And a
Let
third
me
question
give you an
is,
example of something that recently happened that made me think of this. I
Okay.
play fantasy football,
yeah,
and I needed a running back a couple of weeks ago because my running back was injured. And I was looking at the waiver wire, and there was a couple running backs I wanted to choose from, and I thought Kareem Hunt is one of them, and I said the other one was Chris Rodriguez is another one, and I just didn't know who I wanted to pick. And my friend said, you should definitely choose Kareem Hunt. He's on a better offense, better matchup. And I was like, all right, that's one option. And then I started watching a podcast, and the person on the podcast was like, Kareem Hunt's going to have a great game. And I chose Kareem Hunt. My friend posited Kareem Hunt first, but I went with the decision based on the podcast that happened later.
yeah,
Now think about this for a second.
yes.
We're in the 3rd century. There are Christians going, we need to do December 25th. I did a calculation. Look, 9 months. And they're like, I don't even care about birthdays. And this other one saying, no, June 2nd, September 7th, October 15th. There's all these different calculations being thrown around. And then 274 rolls around, and Aurelian dedicates a temple to Sol Invictus on December 25th. And now you're leading the church, and you're going, my friend Hippolytus, he gave us that suggestion. Maybe we should. Maybe this would be a good idea. Maybe this will be a time that we should, that's an option.
Yeah, it is. Yes. Part of it is just the difficulty of reading minds from antiquity.
Of course. It's all
let me put it this way.
Yeah.
Obviously, someone somewhere got excited about, I'm sure you could find ancient individuals that were particularly excited about December 25th as the birthday of Jesus because they happened to worship the sun god on that day. I'm sure those people existed. Yeah. A larger question, though, is so the evidence that Aurelian founded this temple on December 25th and instituted these holidays, it's not super strong.
It's not strong, yeah. That's what Heidmans points out.
Yeah.
However, let me push back on that for a second. Because once we get to the calendar of Philocus, and then we know that they are having a feast, you kind of got to go, is it real? Did he really dedicate the temple on that day by chance? And then they decided to have this same day? And then also the fact that it's a sun god and it's on a solstice. I think there's a lot going in favor of they did it because of this reason.
Well, remember, we do know there were various feast days for the sun god and in Rome, and they don't appear to correlate with the equinoxes or solstices for whatever reason.
Right.
We know there was 3 or 4 other
October
dates.
One too, for the
yeah. Another issue is that clearly this was like a minor holiday, and that's probably why we have so little evidence about it. We have a lot more evidence for things like Saturnalia and other larger holidays. So that's another issue. Here's what we do know. John Chrysostom preaches a sermon in 386 AD in Antioch, the Eastern Mediterranean. We have this sermon. It's on Christmas Day, December 25th. And he says, hey, this Christmas holiday is new. We used to do it on a different day. And we've actually only been doing it on this day for 10 years. So that gets us back to 376. And then he goes on to say, but we learned this from the Romans who've been doing this for a long time. And he says, and it's quickly spread throughout the Roman world. And we see all these other Christmas sermons come up around the 380s, 370s, 360s. Right. Clearly there's this growth. So,
but at the same time, you see the same kind of growth in paganism with Macrobius' Saturnalia, where he says that Dionysus is depicted as a newborn child at the winter solstice. Mm-hmm. And then he's depicted as an old man at the fall equinox, depicting that his whole life cycle is the year, starting at the winter solstice. So this becomes part of the whole Platonic world soul Godhead that you see in Platonism.
Macrobius also says, when he talks about the sun god, he also says, practically all the gods are the sun god.
Yes, that's the point. They're all this world soul in Platonism.
It's the all God. It's the all God.
Yeah.
I know.
That's
Like,
that's Platonism, though. It's almost monotheistic.
and Macrobius, I mean, he's late.
But
He's in the
that
400s.
God you're talking about, where he says Apollo, this is what he does. He says Apollo and Dionysus are the same God, and and by the way, he's depicted as a child in winter solstice, and so is Adonis, so is Pan, and so is it goes on and on and on. And lists them all.
I know.
But the thing I love about this is he's talking. This is a very monotheistic approach where the gods are all faces of the one. Plato's the one, and it's born. This God is born at the winter solstice, just like the one God of Christianity. So you could see they might not be copying each other, but it might be there's a parallel tradition happening at the same time.
It could be that the pagans are copying the Christians too. It is possible, because again, Macrobius is very late. I would love it if Varro is like the major source on Roman religious traditions and stuff. He's writing well before, Hippolytus. He's writing like 200 years before Hippolytus. It would be great if he said something like this, or if the Roman religious calendars. Well, he says it for Cyrus and Osiris.
Yeah. Which is Dionysus to him.
Yeah, but
he says that in that same book. Dionysus is
and
Osiris.
he's not a Roman. He's a Roman Empire guy, but he's writing in Greece.
And he's also a high priest and a Platonist, high priest of Delphi.
Yeah,
so kind of a religious guy.
But he's not talking about a city of Rome festival on December 25th.
That's true. That's true. As a Platonist, because we're talking that the Roman imperial cult is obviously their Platonism is like the water that they're all fish in. That's like everyone's a Platonist. So they're going through Plutarch at later times. They're going to be going through Plutarch. I mean, Proclus is citing Plutarch. Iamblichus is citing Plutarch. They're all those later Platonists are citing Plutarch. Even I think even Julian mentions Plutarch.
Does he? That's cool. That's cool.
I just think that even if he's Greek and not part of the Roman imperial cult, I don't know if that really how much that matters. Also, what was I going to say? Oh, the Mithraic religion, according to who is it? Porphyry. Porphyry mentions that the solstices are. I have a note here. It's in this article that I got. Let me see if I can pull it up word for word. He says something about the solstices, and it's very fascinating. Where he says, the Mithraic concern with mortality directly to the temporal solstice was the summer solstice widely observed by Mithraic communities as a festival of mortality, or the timing of the event at Vernum, albeit a very appropriate, exploiting Mithraic ideology, which is the one I was. Yeah, here it is. Mithraic theory recorded in Porphyry, descended through the gate of the summer solstice because it was the northern and there was cool, and thus the beginning appropriate of Genesis.
Ooh.
They ascend through the winter solstice because it is southern and therefore warm, and then it's appropriate for apogenesis.
Interesting.
So you have this life-death thing going on.
Of course. Yeah.
I'm just pointing out, I think there's something going on in the culture, in the cultural milieu of the 3rd and 4th century that transcends Christianity and paganism.
I think that I agree that there would have been.
You don't have
pagans.
to agree, by the way. I'm not going to be bad if you don't. I'm just
I agree that there would have been pagans and polytheists who became Christian and were excited about the fact that they still got to do something on the winter solstice. Because I think you can make a pretty good argument that there were polytheistic beliefs and practices that had to do with the winter solstice. And the birth of Jesus also has to do with the winter solstice, if you go with December 25th in the Roman calendar. To me, though, the question is, were the church authorities given that we know December 25th became a religious festival by the mid 300s in the Roman Empire, the question is, were the church authorities, were they the kind of people who would have been motivated to try and have influence on the pagan feast,
Yes.
or try and
yes.
attract people? And
you reminded me of something. There's a letter from the Pope Gregory.
Yeah.
It's in the Venerable Bede source.
Yes.
Where he writes a letter to the Bishop of London, and he tells them not to destroy their culture.
I think I know what you're going to say. Go on.
He says, take the idols out of the temples.
Yeah.
Sprinkle holy water, put a cross in there, and make it a church, and let them continue doing whatever.
Yes. So
and
what I was going to say.
That's amazing. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I love that. That's a strength of Christianity, in my opinion.
So you took the words right out of my mouth. That kind of stuff happens in the 500s and the 600s. But when you go to the 300s, you're talking about very different kinds of Christian bishops here. Like, these are the guys who
it's like comparing us to 1700s or 1800s.
Yeah, I mean, they're very different. John Chrysostom, my goodness, he wouldn't have done. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe someone can find some passages of John Chrysostom doing stuff like this.
Well, I could tell you that Eusebius was very interested in paganism. That's a fact. I mean,
of course he was interested.
You ever read his what is it called? The preparation for the gospel.
Of course.
He says that all these religions are essentially pointing to Christ.
I know, but
he's
the
like
question is different
of the time period.
Yes, but the question is he the kind of guy to go into a pagan temple and be like, okay, this is a church now, your altar, we're just going to take over all your rites and just put the name Jesus in there, which is what Gregory kind of did.
Yeah.
And Eusebius doesn't seem like that kind of. So my point is that I think if I had to put my money down on it, I think that the reason.
When did they start transferring Mithraeums into churches? Because that's isn't that pretty early on, or no? Is that later?
Well, I mean, the earliest church, we don't have many churches from even the 300s that are left.
That's true.
We have that Dura Europos church from 250, 260, but that was just a house church. But they do. I mean, they'd start. Here's the other thing is, like, there's a difference between what Gregory said. Just keep everything, but replace the God with Jesus, and you're good. They can still do their rites and celebrations. That's different from someone going in and being like, hey, we're kicking all you pagans out. You have to convert, and we're destroying everything except we're just keeping the building because it's a nice building. I mean, those are two different things. And I don't, I think the second one is not a good thing to do, but people do it. So I think I'll say, yes, I think that clearly there's some people around that probably were worshiping the sun god or doing something on December 25th in the 4th century, 5th centuries, and they're excited about a different holiday, a Christian holiday on December 25th. I don't know. John Chrysostom tries.
If you read through the PGM material,
PGM.
I know the PGM is not the Greek magical papyri.
Oh yeah.
And also Sibylline oracles, but this maybe not as much, where you see a blending of sort of some of the pagan ideas going into Christian, or like some of the gods are mentioned and whatever. That's in the Sibylline oracles, but the Greek magical papyri, and I know this is not written by bishops or church fathers. It's just like random people. It's like the ancient version of New Age people, kind of. But you can see the people on the ground, the average everyday farmer people, are more likely to mix and match and mix things together than you would with like a bishop or a.
I agree. Yep. Yeah.
So it depends on. So the question might be, are they listening to those people and maybe taking consideration a little bit, or no?
I don't know. I mean, John Chrysostom refused to go along with what the empress wanted. I mean, he was basically martyred.
There's a John Chrysostom passage where he says, well, I don't. He puts his hands up and says, "These people can recite Euripides and they can cite Homer, but they can't even. They don't even remember Matthew."
Yeah. So
He's like pissed.
yeah. So I don't. I mean, I need to see stronger evidence before I think there was like the 4th century church authorities that were really gunning for this because of a pagan holiday. I think it was the solar symbolism and it was the calculation theory that's what did it.
Yeah.
I could be persuaded.
What are your thoughts on Epiphanius' passage? We haven't talked about that yet.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Can I pull that one up for you? For people?
Yeah, because he says it's a pagan holiday.
Exactly. That's why I think we need to talk about it.
He gets all bent out of shape about it.
Yeah, he says it's 3 other gods celebrated on December 12th, born of a virgin. Here's what he says.
Does he say? Well, I forgot that.
This is written in the 360. I want to say. Maybe you could pull that up.
Maybe a little later. I think it was a little later. Let me look it up.
He died in 390, right? 391. So it had to be before that.
You know, you're right. I think you're right. Okay, yeah.
I want to say like 360s. This is written. Maybe 370s. But
okay.
Let's just Anyone watching this, fact check me. Maybe it's 380. I don't know. But it's not in the first half of the 4th century. So that's making sure we understand that. Second half of the 4th century.
374 to 377.
Okay. All right. That's good. I'm glad you fact checked me. All right. 375. Okay. He says Christ was born on the 8th before the Ides of January, 13 days after the winter solstice, and the increase of light and day. Greeks, the idolaters, celebrate this day on the 8th before the calends of January, which the Romans call Saturnalia.
That's the 25th of December, yeah.
Yeah. Egyptians, Chronia, and the Alexandrians, Cacalia. For this division between signs of the zodiac, which is the solstice, comes on the 8th before the calends of January. He just repeats himself for some reason. And the day begins to lengthen because the light is receiving its increase. And it completes a period of 13 days until the 8th before the Ides of January. The day of Christ's birth, with a 30th of an hour added to each day. The Syrian sage Ephraim testified to this calculation. So he cites someone here. That's interesting. In his commentaries, when he said, do you know when this guy lived, by the way? Ephraim the Syrian. Does anyone know?
Yeah. He lived in this. Actually, that's fascinating. He's basically contemporary. He wrote in the 370s, 360s.
Okay. So he's citing a fellow guy. Okay.
Yeah.
Testified to this calculation in his commentaries when he said, thus the advent of our Lord Jesus Christ, his birth in the flesh, or perfect incarnation, which is called epiphany. Remember that word. I'm going to come back to this in a little bit. Was revealed after a space of 13 days from the beginning of the increase of light. For this, too, must needs to be a type of the number of our Lord Jesus Christ and his 12 disciples, since, added to the disciples, he made the number of 13 days of the light's increase. And how many other things have been done and are done because of in their testimony in the calculation, of Christ's birth? Indeed, those who guiltfully preside over the cult of idols are obliged to confess a part of the truth, and in many places deceitfully celebrate a very great festival on the very night of the Epiphany.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
To deceive the idolaters who believe in them into hoping in the imposture and not seeking the truth. Here's where it gets crazy. First, at Alexandria, in the Corium, that's the mother of Dionysus. She's also.
And is this is on January 6th right now?
Yes.
Okay.
So Dionysus's mother, Zagreus, is called the Cori. Cori or Persephone. That's her name. She's also equated with Isis in Plutarch.
Okay.
As they call it, it is a very large temple, the shrine of Cori. Cori, by the way, Cori means either maiden or virgin.
Yeah.
They stay up all night singing hymns to the idol with a flute accompaniment. And when they have concluded their night-long vigil, torchbearers descend into an underground shrine after cockcrow and bring up a wooden image which is seated naked on a litter. It has a sign of a cross. I'm guessing this is like some sort of ankh or something. I don't know about a cross, unless he's just heard bad information. Inlaid with gold on its forehead, 2 other such signs, one on each hand, 2 on two other signs actually on its knees, altogether 5 signs with the gold impress. And they carry the image itself 7 times around the innermost shrine with flutes, tambourines, and hymns, hold a feast, take it back to its place underground. And when you ask them what this mystery means, they reply, today at this hour, Kori, that is virgin, and if you look up the Greek, he usually uses the word Parthenos, gave birth to Ion. This is also done, and by the way, if you look up Ion, the Neoplatonist writers equate Ion with Dionysus and Osiris. What else? And then he's also in the Mithraic mysteries as Saturn. So there's a weird thing going on. There's a mosaic that they dug up in Syria, in Antioch, Syria, that dates to the 2nd century. Beautiful mosaic of Ion, where he's got 3 avatars, past, present, and future, and they're all Ion. One of them is a young-looking kid. The other one looks a little bit middle, and the other one has a long beard and older. And it says, and I'll just continue. This is also done in the same way in the city of Petra, in the temple of the idol there. Petra is the capital of Arabia, the scriptural Edom. They praise the Virgin with hymns in the Arab language, calling her in Arabic Kamu, that is Kori or Virgin. And the child who was born of her they call Dusaris. And I don't know if you know about Dusaris. He's another god, kind of a Dionysian figure, a grapevine god with intoxication type of thing in Arabia. That is the Lord's begotten. This is also done the night in the city of Alusa. Alusa is in Israel, as it is there in Petra and in Alexandria. So we have Alusa, which is in Israel, Petra, Arabia, and Alexandria, Egypt. So I think that's enough. I think we got to get the point here. What do you think about this?
That's fascinating. I have read that before. I had forgotten about the Virgin. It's funny that Epiphanius critiques December 25th for being pagan, but then he goes on to explain all these pagan celebrations happening on his preferred date.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's very confusing. You're right. It's very confusing. Because then he says Saturnalia, they call it Saturnalia. And it's like, wait a minute, are you talking about before the solstice or after the solstice? Like, what are you doing here?
I know, because Saturnalia isn't on December 25th.
It's before the solstice. And then the whole time he's talking about 12 days after the solstice.
Yeah.
Which one, like, what are you doing? What are you talking about?
I know.
It's very confusing.
So this is one of the issues with Epiphanius, is that he has access to an enormous number of sources that are lost, and he reports what they say, but he does not always do the greatest job of being accurate. And so it's hard to sometimes figure out exactly what is true and what isn't. But I mean, clearly, I think there's some kind of syncretism going on here. And the question is, which direction is it going in? Are Christians saying, well, you know, we got to figure out when Jesus is born, and there's these virgin winter solstice cult things, so we'll choose this day? Or are these cults responding to Christianity?
Sure.
And it could be both too. I mean, remember, the Roman Empire is so huge that you don't need a monodirectional movement.
I think they're borrowing from each other. That's where I tend to go to. I think it's the likeliest.
And clearly over time, both things are happening. That you have like Gregory the Great is an example of this, where he is endorsing the loose borrowing from paganism to an extent. The question is this happening with the date of Christmas and the festivities? Because in some sense, Christmas is like the second holiday of Christianity, because the first one was only Easter and Good Friday. It was everything associated with the resurrection of Jesus. For 300 years, that's like the only thing that Christians would mark on an annual basis. And the other would be the weekly Sunday event. But then clearly in the 4th century, Christmas comes up and you get these Christmas sermons, and it's really big, and it's like, I mean, I think it was the solar symbolism. I don't think initially paganism had much of an effect on it, but because I just think that the early bishops, you know, we know who these guys are: John Chrysostom, Gregory Nazianzus, Gregory of Nyssa. We know these guys. We know their theology. We know their lives. and they just aren't really disposed to doing something like that. But
and I think what you're saying is really important, because there might be two different things going on here. There might be some of these Greek magical papyri Christians in their own corners doing whatever they want. Like they're just completely mixing and matching whatever. But they're not, that's not what the church is doing. The church is sticking to their doctrines, their dogmas, they're sticking away from Judaism, staying away from paganism, sticking to their guns. And I think what you're getting in Epiphanius is he's hearing about all these other traditions that are not orthodox. This book is about heresy, if you think about it.
Yeah.
He's writing about all these rumors. There's one more that I want to go through in Epiphanius that I think is important. And I'll show you why, if you want to just kind of take a sit back and I'll show you some interesting stuff and I'll get your thoughts on it. And then we'll close out. I appreciate your time, by the way. This is awesome. I'm having a good time.
Of course.
Okay. Epiphanius. Where am I? Here we go. He says this interesting thing about the Epiphany. And he says, let me see, where should I start? From his birthday, the Epiphany, January 5th, the dawn of January 6th. That's very fascinating that he says that. I'll tell you why. Let me just read this first. The 11th of the Egyptian month, Tybee. It's weird that he uses the Egyptian month. He could have just said January 5th. I don't know why he said that, but I think I have a reason. Until the 13th before the calends of April, as I said, the 13th before the calends of April, the 24th of the Egyptian month of Famenonth. I have noticed too that there are those who give a date for the conception. We were talking about conception earlier, and Gabriel's bringing of the time. By the way, this is interesting because this actually highlights that there were people calculating the conception rather than the birth. Interesting. All right. And he says, tidings to the virgin who said, because supposition of certain persons who have it by tradition, that Christ was born after a term of 7 months. That's not in the Bible. Where did that come from? It says, for I have found that there is a time of 7 lunar months, less 4 days, between the month they mentioned and the 11th of Tybee, that the 8th before the calends of January, when in fact the Epiphany came and Christ was born. So if you should find this in marginal gloss somewhere, do not be misled by the information. The actual date of Christ is in fact the 11th of Tybee, which is January 6th or 5th or whatever. And then he says, I'm just going to skip ahead of here. In any case, it has been shown by every means that the Lord's birth in the flesh took place on the 11th of the month of Tybee. And the first miracle of Cana in Galilee, when the water was made wine, was performed on about the same 11th day, 30 years later. Now, let me just pause on that for 1 second, because I don't know if you know this, but in this to this day, the Orthodox Church has 2 commemorations on January 6th. Do you know what they are? The Epiphany and the wedding of Cana. So we could see Epiphanius is telling us about this tradition right now, or it's already right there.
Yeah.
2025, this year, or I should say next year, January 6th, 2026, the Orthodox Church on January 6th will celebrate not only the Epiphany of Christ and birth of Christ, but also the wedding at Cana, which is interesting. And I'll tell you why. And to this very day, it happens in many places, a testimony to unbelievers because of the miracle which was wrought at that time. Streams and rivers in many localities testify by being changed to wine. Did you know about this? There are streams. Epiphanius is saying that in his day and age, there were miracles happening where streams of water were turning into wine.
Right.
Look at this. He says, the stream at Kibere, the chief city of Caria, which is in Turkey, bears witness at the same time of day, which the servants drew water, and Christ said, give it to the governor of the feast. And the stream at Gerasa in Arabia testifies in the same way. I have drunk from the one at Kibere myself, and my brethren have drunk from the stream in Martyrium in Gerasa. And in Egypt too, many give this testimony of the Nile. Okay, why did I want to bring this up? I want to show you something really quick. In Diodorus, here we go. Diodorus has
Diodorus Siculus.
Yes, he says that he has this really interesting thing to say about Dionysus' birth. He says, and there's a place of the stele where the gods bearing in Egyptian in hieroglyphics, and then he switches over from Dionysus to Osiris. He kind of just like uses the terms interchangeably. He says, Cadmus, who was a citizen of Egyptian Thebes, begot several children, one who was Semele. She was violated by an unknown person, became pregnant, and after 7 months gave birth to a child whose appearance was such as the Egyptians hold to have been that of Osiris. 7-month birth? Now, such a child is not usually brought into the world alive, either because it is contrary of the will of the gods or because the law of nature not permitted it. But when Cadmus found out what had taken place, having at the same time a reply from an oracle commanding him to observe the laws of his fathers, he both gilded the infant and paid it appropriate sacrifices. And on the ground that there was sort of an epiphany.
An epiphany.
He uses that word, epiphany.
No.
Okay, so that's something. That's interesting. But then what about the streams of water? That's a weird one. Well, if we go to Pliny, ready for this? It is accredited by Mucianus, 3 times consul, that water flowing from a spring in the temple of Father Liber on the island of Andros always has the flavor of water on January 5th.
Of wine.
And the day is called Theodosia, God's gift day.
And Liber is Dionysus.
Yes. Same day of the year.
Uh,
Same water turning into wine miracle. Epiphany.
If only Epiphanius knew what he was doing when he drank that water.
I know. So this is interesting that you pointed out something though, because what he's taught, what Epiphanius is relating to us might not be orthodox. It's obviously not orthodoxy because it's not. We just know it isn't.
It didn't. It did not develop in the church.
This is not. Nobody's saying this except for Epiphanius. But it tells me that there were Christians, some sort of lower average Joe farmer Christians who didn't really care about what the priests were doing and had no idea. They were just mixing and matching because they just thought it was cool. That were trading, mixing traditions. And then somehow it gets to the ear of Epiphanius. He writes it down. And then we can find it through this little research that we do, you know?
Yeah, I buy it. I think that's what happened with that water into wine stuff on the dates. It's just too much of a coincidence. But I would like to see that same kind of evidence for Christmas.
Sure, I get that. This is two different things. But what do you think about the Orthodox Church celebrating to this very day the January 5th, 6th Epiphany and a wine miracle on the same day?
Got to ask them. To me, it sounds like what Epiphany. It sounds like the order of operations is on January 5th. There was whatever this pagan celebration of this wine miracle, and involving Dionysius and Liber, and that somehow this got transferred to Jesus turning water into wine on that day in Epiphanius's day and age, in certain locations or in Gerasa, that then eventually morphed into a feast day in the official Orthodox Church on that day.
Doesn't that kind of answer the question? Is there a degree of pagan influence? Like, not saying that we're secretly pagans. No, I'm not saying that. Is there a degree of, I think we can say a little bit, right?
Regarding Christmas, you mean?
Regarding this the Epiphany Christmas season itself, you know what I mean? Because they kind of go hand in hand. I think.
If you mean that, like, there were some people who, of course, there's going to be some Roman Christians who are running around. I think for me, you were able to lay out a really clear line of evidence chronologically, and it was very clear. But with the Feast of the Sun God on December 25th, it's so much squishier, and I would want to see, So one possible way to do, to talk about December 25th, why that date was chosen compared to other dates that are floating around. One reason is we haven't even suggested yet, is just the simple matter of fact is that all these different Christians in the 2nd and 3rd centuries and 4th centuries are trying to come up with the date of Jesus's birth. For whatever reason, Hippolytus in Rome and Julius Africanus also in Rome may have come up with December 25th. And then when Christianity is growing in influence in the 4th century, Rome has this enormous amount of power, and they go with their own date, and that's just what happens. And that would like have nothing to do with a lot of stuff. But
Sure.
So
I mean, I think December 25th is a totally separate topic than the whole like Epiphany, January 6th, Dionysian influence. Those are two different things. I'm not saying that those are the same. I mean, I guess, yeah, what I'm saying is those are two different things. One question is, does the Epiphany and the idea that they're commemorating the miracle of wine on this day, the wedding at Cana, have anything to do with the whole Theodosia festival that we get in Pliny, which is in the 1st century, by the way? I think there's a degree of that going on, but that has nothing, as you point out, that doesn't have anything to do with why December 25th becomes, but maybe a little bit, because the Epiphany to me is the earliest tradition of a winter birth celebration. And I think
in Clement of Alexandria, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, which I forgot to point out, he uses the same month of Tybee, 11th of Tybee, to describe it. He doesn't just say January 6th. He uses 11th of Tybee for some reason, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
Makes me think he's reading that source or some source or something like that. But I guess what I'm saying is those are two different things. I get that.
But so I will say I'm open. I really want the smoking gun. I want the like this is a 2nd century pagan Roman talking about this is what we do on December 25th with the sun god, stuff like that. And we just don't have that, which means it suggests to me that at least in the city of Rome, whatever they're doing on the December 25th is a pretty minor religious holiday.
Yeah.
Anyway,
we'll
see.
I think Christmas was a minor holiday too for a long time.
Certainly the date when it was first selected, no one was celebrating anything.
Yeah.
It was just a chronological marker.
Right.
And
I think by the time it becomes a big holiday, it's also because Persians still do the Yaldanite thing. They had that Zoroastrian Yaldanite thing for us. And scholars have pointed out the word Yalda is borrowing from Christianity. So
is that
the word Yalda has to do with like Syrian
word
for birth or something like that.
Yeah, that's Semitic, Syriac. Yeah,
yes.
Exactly. Yeah,
so there is a degree of borrowing from Christianity there. I'll admit that. But the fact that they're even worrying about this date and caring about it suggests to me that there are parallel traditions at the same time going on for whatever reason. And I tend to go with the Platonists are the philosophers who are kind of transcending Christianity and paganism. You have Dionysius the Areopagite. He's a Platonist. Origen is a Platonist. If you read Augustine, he's not a Platonist, but he really admires the Platonists and the Stoics.
Yeah.
And then you got Saint whatever his name is, who's Aristotelian. I mean, some of these philosophers are trying to are like looking beyond the religion side, and I think there's a little bit of hand-holding going on. I think there's a little. I don't see them as like having borders up as much as Christians and pagans today see that. I just don't see it that way.
I think that so much of this depends on what we mean. When we say words like syncretism. So it's interesting you use C.S. Lewis as an example of this, because one definition of syncretism, C.S. Lewis is like totally syncretistic. I mean, he's writing mythologies where the god Liber is doing Christian stuff, and he does that in Narnia and things.
Nonus.
And
Nonus he wrote on John's gospel. He's doing Dionysian stuff with Christianity too.
Yeah. And but then you've got people like Tertullian yelling about what does Athens have to do with Jerusalem, and you have other people like who. It's just
there's definitely different.
There's different degrees of syncretism, and I call Mercury the planet Mercury. is that syncretistic? I guess, Monday's Moon Day, Sunday's, Thursday's Thor's Day.
Great point. Sometimes it's not even conscious. It's just part of the culture.
Yeah.
That's what I'm basically trying to get at.
I mean, in that sense, absolutely. The Romans worshipped the Graces as God.
The Caritas. That's very pagan. Yeah.
And that's like the Christian word for grace is usually thought of as this like exclusively Christian idea, but it just means gift. It's just a regular word that just means gift. Apollos, the apostle Apollos, he's named after Apollo, the god.
Right.
That's his name. I mean,
and that's kind of what I argue, is that I don't think these are conscious really decisions of we're going to copy. I just think that the cultural milieu is just sort of dictating how people do things without even them realizing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think a lot of that. Yes, yeah.
Like for example, this is the last thing we can touch on, is the whole season itself of December, where everyone sort of shuts down businesses and everyone goes to their family and they cook dinner and give gifts and decorate the house with greenery. I don't think there's any particular point we can look at and go, this is when it started. That seems to always been a part of Western tradition going back to pre-Christian times. Yeah. I don't think that ever stopped. And I know that one of the things me and Nothaf were talking about was when Theodosius made his decree and sort of said, okay, we're going to be Christians from now on, no more pagan stuff. He kept the calends. And the calends continues all the way on through the Byzantine era, all the way to the 13th century. And that's a big deal. That kind of explains why the season stays the way it does. And I call it a transitional fossil. It's a transitional fossil between the pagan and Christian Christmas.
He also he kept the calendar. I mean, January is the god of doorways, Janus. Right. These are names that we inherit.
That's what the calends was. The calends was a festival dedicated to Janus, and then he kind of got rid of the religious aspect of it. Yeah, secularized it.
Yeah. So, I mean, so the question. I mean, obviously, there's. Yeah. So I don't know. I'm waiting for the smoking gun.
I wasn't expecting you to say, "Oh, you're right." I'm just wanted to have a conversation.
If you find a good early source on, some sun god in the Roman Empire, December 25th, and all these celebrations and stuff, let me know.
I would have found it by now. It's not there. Unless you think Horus is a sun god, but that's,
Yeah.
So, yeah, the closest one there is Harpocrates being born at the winter solstice. Because then you can go, Harpocrates are born at the winter solstice, and then when did Plutarch write this? Early 2nd century. Mm-hmm. When was the winter solstice at that time? December 25th. And it's not. I mean, I'm not really going that far off of what I'm going from the known to the unknown. I'm not going too far into the unknown. I'm just going.
Oh, I just had a thought that I like to see because he's talking about an Egyptian belief, and they use a more accurate calendar. So their winter solstice was actually December 21st or 22nd.
Right, but he also uses the word peri around the time of winter solstice.
Oh, really?
And we don't know if he means around our winter solstice or not.
Yeah.
He doesn't say at their winter solstice date. He doesn't give a date.
Yeah.
He just says
it's just so
Hippocrates is born around the winter solstice.
Okay.
So that's all we got. That's the closest thing we're gonna get to a pre-Christian December or winter solstice, December 25th, whatever you want to call it. The other thing I pointed out in my other videos is there are articles of Mithraeums being dedicated, or some of them have lights that come through on the solstices. And that's that points to the idea that solstices were taken seriously in some of these pagan circles.
Absolutely.
There is no source that, and I tell people this all the time, there is no source that says a pagan god was born on December 25th until after the 3rd century. Obviously you got Macrobius and all that stuff. But that's after.
Yeah, and Julian the Apostate, he mentions a feast of the sun god. I don't know if he says he was born, but he says there was a feast of the sun god. I don't know. I've been looking for more information on December 25th dates, and I've got an article that I'm slowly working on that I've said this before. I've said I'm hoping it's up by next Christmas, and then it never gets done because I've got all this other stuff I'm working on. But if I do come out with it, I will let you know.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I really enjoyed this. Anything you want to promote that you're working on, or?
Well, those two articles, I've written two different articles, one popular, one academic, on the history of the date of Christmas, and the links are going to be somewhere in this video, so check them out. They're freely available. One's on my website, and then the other, I think, is on my website too. If it's not, I'll make sure I put it on there. And then I've got other materials on Josephus and Jesus that people can check out also. And I'm working on, that's what the most of my time right now is taken up in. But I have more things coming out regarding the historical Jesus and Christmas and early Christianity. And maybe I'll be back on your show to talk about those sometime in the future.
Absolutely. I would definitely enjoy that. And you have just attained true gnosis.